So we're just going to wait a couple of minutes as people are coming into the Zoom platform. A warm welcome to you all, wherever you are on this beautiful planet. My name is Dr. Georgi Sabo, the Dean of Graduate Studies at Ubiquity University. And this is the Great Books course of Ubiquity University year 2024. And this is the last book of this year. And it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Ludwig Max Fischer. Who is a German language and literature university professor. He's retired now, but his expertise spans from pedagogy of second language acquisition, intercultural communication, the Age of Goethe, German literature, and so much more. But I always refer to him as the Hesse scholar. He published many books, two of which my favorite, which you can't see because of the Zoom screen, The Seasons of the Soul. This is the selected poems translated by Ludwig. Amazing, absolutely amazing, one of my favorite. And the last one, again, by Ludwig translation, The Seasons of Life. And the third one is coming, and I just asked him that when is it going to be ready, but he said that it's going to be some time. But today and in December, we're going to hear on Hermann Hesse's fairy tales. I don't know how you are, but I love fairy tales and I love short stories. And this is the book I read so many times. And I asked Ludwig if he could give us a deep insight of his about this outstanding book. So we're going to do, as always we do, that Ludwig's going to give us 50 minutes or an hour lecture on this book. And we await your comments or questions or anything you would like to share. So until then, I'd like to turn our attention to Ludwig. It is over to you. Thank you, Ludwig.
All right. Good. So, welcome to this program. And as Professor Sabo said, I am a retired professor of German. I taught at a number of universities, two of them actually in California, University of California, Riverside, and University of Southern California. So this program is in the context of the Great Books series, and it is the last one. And it actually, I think it deals somewhat with the earliest literature that we have, because these fairy tales and these folk tales are very, 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 very old. In fact, we don't actually know their origin. They are part of an oral tradition that precedes the writing age. And what are we going to do with them, with these fairy tales today? Well, I think the normal conventional thing is that we look at a fairy tale, it's a literary genre, and we simply analyze it now. We become literary critics, and we have different methodologies, different ways that satisfy the literary critic. It is an analytical approach. And so somehow we extract from the fairy tale something that feels or that we think is meaningful. And after that, we move on because we know now what the fairy tale means. But what it means then is actually somehow what we distilled at an intellectual level. And maybe that's actually not the true purpose of the fairy tale. It might be actually that there is a transmission intended, a way of teaching that is older, very older, and it is a connected way of teaching. It's a relational way of teaching. So in our assignment that we have actually from Ubiquity University, we have some learning objectives I thought I should mention before we start our investigation and exploration. So the learning objectives are to understand the qualities that distinguish a literary work as a great book. And in our case, I would say a great story. And the second one is to reflect upon the challenges framed by authors in ancient times in light of current crises. So one of the qualities of fairy tales is that they seem to be able to survive centuries, millennia. Empires come and go. It's sort of Oswald Spengler, The Decline of the West, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. We do have these kind of stories, these folk tales and fairy tales, and then of course also the myth. You know, somebody once said to me that a myth and then a fairy tale is in a way a little myth, that the myth is about something that never was, but always is. Something that never was, but always is. So somehow these stories transport you in a realm where the factual becomes secondary, but not in the sense that it's full of misinformation and disinformation, which causes so much trouble in our current contemporary world. But it is actually a deeper information. So it's more a message. And it's a message that has different dimensions of where it brings across values and its merits and its usefulness for a person's life, not only in the early development stages of childhood. So our third assignment is that when we deal for Ubiquity University, with great books, is to grapple with deep issues common to all humanity through active discussion and web forum postings and or paper assignments. Well, I think, yeah, the conventional thing is when you are doing advanced studies in literature, that if you become a real expert on a specialist, for example, in Hermann Hesse's fairy tales, then you eventually will write papers and you deliver papers. So I, in my academic life, I delivered lots of papers at various academic conferences, from Brazil to Hungary to mainland China twice, and Egypt, and so on and so on. And so you get up there and then you tell the people, for example, as I did about a few years ago at an international folktale conference in Athens, Greece, what this particular fairy tale means. And then they know, and they go home and you hopefully get your article published, and you are hopefully actually get tenure then as an academic. So we're also supposed to compare the major themes of the books that we studied. So that will be upon you then to look at other books that you read in that great books series. So I want to put a question actually right in the beginning, this conventional approach, because are these fairy tales really in their more important purpose meant to only be analyzed? Or are they actually to be told? And I do think that in our age, where we are dealing so much with indirect communication, and of course what we're doing right now is indirect communication. It does has its purpose, it has its benefits, and the advantages are certainly real. But as we use them, we have to look at an ecology, I think, that is mostly overlooked and ignored. That the direct communication, what I call the living word, is of utmost importance, not to be replaced by the indirect word. That means by the language that is manipulated and can be manipulated in so many ways electronically. So we don't even know anymore who is speaking, because somebody actually, like, you think you are right there with me now in a certain way. I could actually probably, with a good person that has the electronic faculties, you could see Einstein, and I would speak with the voice of Einstein, give me great authority. So there is a question here of authenticity. There is a question here of what the difference really is between receiving language through the direct living word or in a mediated way. That can be easily balanced, and actually that will be part of your homework that I will give you, is that it's important not just to read, not just to know about, either in a direct lecture or in a Zoom presentation, but it's important that you will also tell and experience the gain of understanding when you actually tell a story. In my life, after I would say about half of the academic career, I had the opportunity to learn from some actual storyteller. And instead of thinking that it's only for children, I remember an experience where I was living for almost a year in Paris, in France, and I found myself in a movie theater, but we weren't watching movies, which is actually another very interesting, important thing. You know, right now, actually, I'm going to give it away. I'm telling you about how to make $1 billion. You take one of those fairy tales by Hermann Hesse, and I can tell you which one I think would be the most profitable ones, and you turn it into a script. So since I've been around Hollywood for in different ways through my own personal somehow path in life, I can tell you what the script writers do. They read a lot of fairy tales from Africa to the North Pole, from China to Latin America, every tradition, and actually a folktale specialist, academic scholar, had a close look at the film Shrek. I'm sure some of you saw that film. And it traced its different components to 23 different fairy tales. So most people have seen Star Wars. That's the Grail story with technology. Joseph Campbell, whom I knew, was a consultant to George Lucas. So there is a power. There's a power in these fairy tales that has a timeless quality, that has an extremely flexible quality in terms of it can adapt to different cultures. You know, the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm have worldwide distribution for centuries and are really actually in a way the property of children of many, many, many cultures. So if you are an academic scholar and you deal with fairy tales, then I recommend you follow the example of Jack Sipes. So some of you, I think, have this book, The Fairy Tales of Hermann Hesse. And this is an excellent translation. And here is somebody by the name of Jack Sipes. He actually taught for many years at the University of Minnesota and Minneapolis, where I also taught. Actually, it was my first academic job after my Ph.D. So he is the translator of, I would say, is probably the most common one. There are a few others. I discovered one I want to show you, and that is the Fairy Tales of Hermann Hesse, a selection. And this is actually by a person who just recently, last year, it's available, it's get printed on demand, and you can easily get it by some Tim Newcomb, who lives in Germany. So there's another task you could do with a fairy tale. You could look at different translation, and you see how actually, which brings us to this whole huge issue of translation, what is being lost. Very difficult. I think it was T.S. Eliot who said, poetry is what is lost in translation. So, but you will get a little bit closer. You know, if you look at a great poem or a great work that has been translated, and you look at how different translators approached that text, then you get a little bit more of a variety of the potential possible associations, because you always deal with a field of culturally conditioned and culturally grown, organically grown associations with certain key words. For example, the word Herz and Geist, heart, and with Geist, it could be translated as ghost, as spirit, as mind, as, you know, in different ways. So the art of translation is a very, very difficult art, and you lose some. And I do actually know some people who are learn German just because they wanted to be able to read Rilke in the original. So Jack Sipes, devoted quite a bit of his life to fairy tales. And some of his books, I can highly, actually all of them, I can highly recommend. But what he also did is, and that's what I want to put a little bit sort of into your mind, is that, and here is at the end of this book I just showed you, where it says Jack Sipes, in addition to his scholarly work, it says here, he is an active storyteller in public schools and has worked with children's theaters in France, Germany, Canada, and the United States. So a balance, I think, between dealing with the fairy tale as an object, really, of your analytical skills to extract meaning. Because once I experienced in Paris in that movie theater the power, it was a gypsy storyteller, a woman, who simply took that whole audience of several hundred people on a journey. And literally nobody was thinking or being able to do, we were actually all mesmerized. You get into the story. So this is a different gesture. So instead of doing this one, kind of this, what can I extract from the story? Because inevitably you attack it basically with a certain ideology. So the positivistic scholar, the biographical scholar, you will find all kinds of similarities. For example, in the dwarf, in that story, fairy tale in our book, you will find, oh, Hesse had a very detailed knowledge about Venice because he mentions, the Canale Grande and the different historical buildings. And actually, one of the major cultures that Hesse was influenced by was the Italian culture. So after growing up in Calv in the Black Forest and spending some time in Basel and in Bern, and I will not focus at this point in some of his life because there's so much available everywhere. If you really were interested in his development, also his spiritual development, I do recommend an excellent biography by Ralph Friedman called Hesse, Pilgrim of Crisis. So anyway, but I want to go back to my French, in France, my gypsy storyteller. I experienced something that I thought, oh, that is what can happen when you get into the story rather than pulling what you have as identified as meaningful. Because, fairy tales have been criticized heavily because they contain an ideology, a Christian one, and it's well hidden, and a patriarchal on top of that. I mean, can anything be worse? So there were attempts, and many attempts actually, to clean them up. And then there's violence in this story. And if you ever tell a fairy tale to a child, they get really excited when we come to the scary part. And then the wolf devours the little child, and the scarier the better. But since it, in modern child psychology, it hurts the psyche of the child, we have a number of attempts to clean all of this violence out. And then actually, the patriarchy has to be also has to be removed. So there are a number of authors that rewrote fairy tales from a feminist perspective. So we can't have the king to give all the orders, we must have the queen. We cannot follow with Hansel and Gretel in the fairy tales. It can't be just the Gretel always that does the hard work. A strange thing happened, though, that the original fairy tales seem to somehow persist. And there are being attractive and being popular. So, but back to the scholar and to this book. I have selected some of these fairy tales that are in our book that I think are particularly interesting. And they are, and actually I want to reserve that for our meeting on December the 10th. And that is the dwarf. Because the dwarf might be the most fascinating, and it's definitely for one of you who are at this point students to write a script and make a film out of that and make your first billion. So that was written in 1904, and the dwarf actually is available that you can listen to it read by the folk singer Donovan. Donovan, who wrote these songs, Colors and Catch the Wind and Sunshine Superman. He lives in Ireland. He's alive. And in 2 hours and 50 minutes, you can listen to all of these stories read with great dedication and love. In fact, I saw Donovan at one point live in a concert in Munich, Germany. So there is an immense attraction to the way Hermann Hesse approaches his life experience and what he transmits as possible experiences. He has been actually heavily criticized as a romantic. Oh, that's pretty bad, isn't it? Well, I think in Hesse's point of view, for him, the fairy tale, and as he says in one of those fairy tales in your book, is where I am the prince and king of possibilities. The prince and king of possibilities. It is opening up the fairy tale a dimension that becomes active, that otherwise is denied, neglected, dismissed, ridiculed in this factual realism that is, what is acceptable for a postmodern person to gain credibility. So there we have in a man by the name of Ziegler, we have in Dr. Knögler's End, we have in Augustus, we have in the fairy tale The Poet, in the fairy tale a dream sequence, or in Empire or in Iris, we have interactions where trees talk, where suddenly out of nowhere there is a helper appearing. There is a kind of a deus or dea ex machina, an inexplicable shift in the story. And yet the storyteller, and in this case the writer of fairy tale, is able not to lose the credibility and not able to is not losing your attention. So that is something. Now the ones that I just mentioned, I think are particularly suitable. Before I talk about a specific tale, I'd like just to give you a few avenues of scholars and approaches. The Marxist scholar, of course, will realize who is exploiting whom. And in fairy tales, you have a aristocracy. Usually you have a king or a queen, and who rules and who is the slave and who is exploited by whom, with what kind of justification. Now that's, of course, is what you will identify and expose. And particularly, I'm thinking right now of the French scholar Roland Barthes. What has become quite fashionable in a way is to demythologize fairy tales. So whatever is in there that has a mythic, that has a magic quality, is actually a hidden ideology. And you're not supposed to notice it because you get so enchanted and so entranced with what's going on in the story that it kind of slides in on the side. Because a certain culture knows that for you to become fully socialized in a particular society, you are supposed to adopt and adapt to the values of that society without noticing really what they imply. So become a good, obedient citizen that makes various sacrifices and has learned the morals of the poor people really well. But doesn't notice that these rules they're not really valid for the rich people, for the aristocracy, for those who are powerful. So the socialization process is then complete for a child, and all of you who have been exposed to fairy tales somewhere around 9, 10, 11 at the latest. In school, you have your analytical mind and your critical mind trained. But underneath, in your subconscious, there is a foundation that is actually a deeper motivator. And so here we have, if you look at one approach in dealing with fairy tales, you have a Freudian approach. And you find Oedipus vary in many places. You find the various sexual repressions and lots of things that have different shapes immediately refer in some way to the anatomy either of the men or the women are related to sexual activity. And so you kind of, again, you tear the mask off the tail. But you know, there's a woman by the name of Piccola Estes. And the last two names, because women who run with the wolves. And sometimes I think this whole exclusively analytical approach is like you think that the fairy tale is a deer. And instead of running with it in the woods in its natural environment, which are symbols and metaphors and a mystical, magical world, you actually shoot it. This is sort of your analytical mind that shoots that wild animal. And then, well, you cut it up. So I think a lot of the analytical approach to deal with a fairy tale is a bit like what a taxidermist does. And then puts then that deer on the wall, you know, that stuff, or eats the steak or whatever meat that he can use, or maybe the skin. But there's a problem with that. The animal is dead. And the folk tale, the fairy tale is dead. You did successfully, though, benefit from what? Well, from the dead animal. So maybe, though, if you consider you could learn something by running with it into the woods of symbols and to the forest, and get involved and surrender to that magic by telling or by listening, like I did at that theater with the gypsy storyteller. So what I did, actually, I did then study in an experiential way with some major American storyteller and actually Native American. And I noticed that there are different ways that I could relate to the story and grow with the story. Some of them, right now, I would say I recommend Martin Shaw. Is a very fine British storyteller in the finest oral tradition. Somebody I took workshops with and listened to, and is Michael Mead. Michael Mead has a wonderful storyteller in the Shanaki tradition, and he wrote a wonderful book called Water of Life. This is a current fairy tale. Water of Life, if you can get it. And then again, one of my favorite of what you can do with a fairy tale is Robert Bly, Iron John. Might be upside down for you. Iron John, Robert Bly. That is the great American poet who just takes one fairy tale, the fairy tale of Iron John, and in 300 pages, he shows like every vowel, every consonant, every word has its own symbolic quality. And within 5 pages of that fairy tale, there's such a condensed collective wisdom. And how, so this brings me to this topic, actually, of that fairy tales impart wisdom. And there I discovered recently a wonderful little book, The Wisdom Way of Knowing, by Cynthia Bourgoul, reclaiming an ancient tradition to awaken the heart. And Thomas Moore has wrote the foreword. So if you really want to get a lot out of a fairy tale, I'll tell you the secret. Get into it. That means shift the stance that you take towards how far, how deep you can give yourself to it. So a lot of the ways that a storyteller, in bringing the intensity of the wisdom and the ancient and the timeless wisdom, is where the storyteller works on his or her voice. And it isn't that loud, persuasive voice. And it isn't the voice that in a quantitative way wants to throw huge amount of knowledge onto you. Because right now we have a huge mistake, a misunderstanding about what it means to what I call working with words, WWW. This is the other World Wide Web, working with words. And what you need to, what is very important is that we're dealing with a quantitative flood, like a biblical flood of data, of an invalidation, actually, and a misunderstanding of what language is. Hermann Hesse has a great poem, actually, about language, which maybe I'll read to you on next meeting. But that misunderstanding has been identified a long time ago. There was a French philosopher by the name of René Guénon, who wrote a book called The Reign of Quantity and the Science of Time. So we are dealing with a quantitative illusion. So you have all these fairy tales, and you have them at the click into your computer, and then you read them online. Well, if you think that you read words, you are mistaken. You sort of read corpses of words, or you don't get the roots. You don't get the root of the word, and you don't get the branches and the leaves and the flowers. Those you have to and can only get as you get into the fairy tale by telling it, of being fully involved in an active listener. So the quantitative illusion can be remedied. That means you can heal your relation with language, and the fairy tales are a very powerful instrument for that, by actually working on the quality of your attentiveness, of your attention. The children, when they listen to the fairy tale, they are totally in it and with it. It's just enchanting, mesmerizing. So can you do that? Should you do that as a mature and advanced student, as an adult? Well, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Did somebody else say that a little while ago? So here is what I recommend to you. As you read, maybe again for December 10th, the fairy tales, you read the tale once, and then you pick out a sentence or two, or the most three, that somehow speak to you in a way where it feels these words engage you. It doesn't mean that you extract the meaning and know exactly what they mean, but you feel it rest. And then you take a pen, and then you write out this sentence 10 times on a piece of paper. No, yes, on a piece of paper. And you write it out by hand. Handwriting. Another lost art, almost lost art. And then you reflect on whether at the end, whether it is the same sentence. So instead of approaching the tale with a specific analytical agenda, you actually go into the story, and the wisdom actually will come to you. The wisdom way of knowing. And the wisdom way of knowing depends on the quality of your listening, on the quality of your attention, on the quality of your concentration. Because that's one of the big dangers. And there the visual is actually weaker than the oral. Walter Ohm spoke, the Jesuit priest, from orality to literacy. And I spent a lot of time in my life actually studying the work of a German, he called himself later on the apostle of listening. And his name was Joachim Ernst Behrendt. And his book is called The Third Ear. I actually translated one of his books. And there is the act of listening is actually superior. So in other words, in the hierarchy and the depth of our senses, the visual one is actually a reduction. It's less precise, actually less deep. So when we have a movie, whatever it is, there are so many. It's another talk, actually. I'm not going to be able to talk about today, but all the movie versions, all the many Cinderellas, the Snow White, the Disney. When you receive that, you watch it. This is a passive act. And the imagination is actually, you're robbed of your own imagination. Because the deep effect that the fairy tale has on the child is through the listening act. And I have some friends, and they have some, they're busy business people, and they had a kid, and they asked the professor of German, because the kid didn't do well in second and third grade in language development and with writing and vocabulary. And I said, but before the kid went to bed, we always had a video of a fairy tale. So for a full hour, sometimes an hour and a half. So our child knows all these fairy tales. And they say they're good for, for the kid who not necessarily calms the child down, but it's just considered valuable. And we bought the whole set, right? You have them all. And I said, well, I have a suggestion. How about, if you don't have really time, I think maybe if you make time, it will change. And it actually did. But the kid got much better in the language development as soon as that word wasn't an artificial word anymore, but it was a relational word between parent and a child. So what we've done with language, we have basically mechanized, materialized, devalued, and it didn't escape everybody. Because some of the things that I say today, and on December 10th, people say, oh, he's unrealistic. And so there's a French philosopher by the name of Jacques Ellul, and I'm a great fan of his work. And he wrote a book called The Humiliation of the Word. The Humiliation of the Word. Jacques Ellul, 1913 to 1993, and his friend Bernard Charbonneau. And he actually in French is la parole humiliée. So we have devalued the power of the word. I took once a 3-week seminar on the beginning. That was the word, and the word has become flesh, with an anthroposophist. But it has changed, you know. In the beginning, I would say there was the magic of the fairy tale, and at the end, there were billions of word data. So as I said earlier, the whole word is something different. It comes through direct transmission to you. You know, the Oriental teachers are very clear on that. So many people sort of are very excited about, you know, being devout Buddhists. These people, they insist, they're tulkus and lamas and different teachers, they insist on direct personal transmission of their tradition. And they're also quite big on the memorization, so that the word becomes an active command. Because what right now, with the inundation of all these words, those dead words, you know, that don't have roots anymore, and they don't have branches and leaves and flowers or nuts growing on them. You only get the logs, and it's the dead wood. That's when you start your computer, that's why you log in, because you're dealing with logs. So an ecology between the living word shared and a collective memory that is being transmitted in the direct sharing of the word. So now I want to tell you about a brilliant, I need to skip a few things here, but from Jacob Grimm. I mean, if there's an authority on fairy tales, I think he qualifies. He's one of the brothers Grimm. And here it says, Jacob Grimm says in a letter to Achim von Arnim, Romantic poet, on May 20th in the year 1811. And he speaks about poetry. But a fairy tale is a form of poetic language because it uses symbols and metaphors and potentials. But I do have to interrupt myself, and I apologize, but as I speak to you, and I'm in a sort of a garden-like neighborhood, right in front of me, maybe less than 10 meters, we have urban deer here. And there are two big deer walking just along the street in front of my house. So right away, I'm tempted to make a story out of that. But I'm going to need to go back to what Jacob Grimm says. Poetry is which comes purely from the soul into word, and thus springs continually from a natural drive, an innate ability to grasp the soul. Folk poetry arises out of the soul of the collective whole. In my opinion, artistic poetry stems from the individual. This is why the new poetry names its poets, while the old one does not know any to name. So the fairy tale comes out of a collective whole, W-H-O-L-E. This is a holistic way of transmitting understanding. It's not at all made by one person or two or three, what he calls the folk poetry and the folk tale. And it's not at all made by one person or two or three. Rather, it is the sum of the collective whole. It remains inexplicable. In other words, all of your explication, no matter what kind of critical theory you throw at it and cut it up in many different forms, you won't get to the root because it's deeper than your cognitive knife with which you slice it. It remains inexplicable how this collective whole was put together and got going. As I have already said, Jakob Grimm says in the text, however, it is not any more mysterious than water gathers from different sources in a river to flow together. I find it unthinkable that there ever was a Homer or an author of the Nibelungen, the German mythic tale. So what is expressed in the fairy tale is a way of transmitting an understanding of our experience in this biological world while we're in it that comes from an innate ability to grasp the soul. And that brings me, of course, to Hermann Hesse right away, that the eminent critic Theodor Ziolkowski published selected letters of Hermann Hesse, and the title is Soul of the Age. Soul of the Age. So he sees Hermann Hesse as a very important person to transmit soul wisdom to his times, because his times were very busy. You know, when we grew up, when he grew up, this was the time when Daimler and Benz invented the car and the airplane, and this is when the modern person started to rush, and it was never fast enough. But for Hesse, it was going at a tremendous speed in the wrong direction. And let me give you one more. It looks like I'm getting pretty close where my hour is over, but I said about 5% of what I thought I could say, but it always has to be enough, no rush. So in his book, Jack Sipes, Why Fairy Tales Stick, he says, the truth value of a fairy tale is dependent on the degree to which a writer is capable of using a symbolical linguistic code and a narrative strategy and a stereotypical characterization to depict, expose, or celebrate the modes of behavior that were used and justified to attain power in a civilizing process of a given society. Have you guessed the joke sizes? Comes from a Marxist point of view? Of course you noticed that. whether oral or literary, the tales have sought to uncover truth about the pleasures and pain of existence, to propose possibilities for adaptation and survival, and to reveal the intricacies of our civilizing processes. So, next time, we're going to dig into the dwarf. That will be our main story. And we'll dig into Iris. Those are the two stories where we go really deep into the actual text. But consider the possibility as homework to practice telling one of these stories, maybe even to us. And then you could record your story and then watch, for example, as a self-reflective exercise, what you leave out in your telling, because of course you're going to tell it without looking at the text, because only then you have brought towards you, into you, the power of the story. So it's my suggestion. So, and remember, handwriting, 10 sentences are the same at the end. And I'm looking forward to hear. Select one of those from our book, the translation by Jack Sipes.
Thank you,
All
Ludwig.
right.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed your presentation. I really like the homework. I really do like it. And it's so interesting that when you read a story and then you try to repeat it, that what are the elements that you're going to say and what are those that you leave out. That's very intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good one. Thank you. So I made some notes as you were going along, and one of which is that thank you so much for opening some glimpses to us to the Hollywood script writer's background. Just for those, this is to our listeners, if you don't know, Ludwig's wife is Gabriella Martinelli, and she's a very well-known, accomplished producer and filmmaker. If you go to Martinelli Films, then you can see all the films that she produced or was part of. Now, I was thinking that you are the linguist. Why in English it is called fairy tales? In Hungarian, we either say tales or we say folk tales. Is it the same in German? Because Hesse wrote in German. So what's the etymology of fairy tales? Because in so many fairy tales, there are no fairies at all. So why is it called fairy tales?
Well, the German word is Märchen. And Märchen, the etymology of Märchen is actually simply Mär means a story. It could be any story. And the term developed into designating children's stories. And the English word fairy tale, it's actually originally that word fairy does not necessarily only refer to what, those little immaterial creatures that run around in the woods. But I think that's an old English word actually that is also, it always refers back to something is being told. Something is being transmitted from person to person and experienced through words. That's really the essence of it. And many of these fairy tales of Hermann Hesse, they could be called, short stories. There are several where there is nothing happening really in the supernatural, and there is in volume 9, for if someone's listening who knows German, and I think Georg is also there here today, in volume 9 of Hesse's collected works, Band 9, Gesammelte Werke, Band 9, there are legends and sagas, and then we could actually here engage in a definition of the fairy tales. Some of them that we have here as fairy tales are simply short stories, or there are more legends and sagas in that big volume, which is about 500 or 600 pages in German, where that combines the legends and sagas and fairy tales that Hesse wrote. There's simply, it's another side of Hesse's imaginative production, literary production. I think he is deeply indebted and has great admiration for the Brothers Grimm, and he also refers quite a bit. He wrote a whole book about Goethe, and Goethe wrote some very important fairy tales, and also got very involved in the mystical poems of Hafiz, the Persian poet. So there is a tradition here to adopt actually the style of the Oriental traditions, these literary traditions, and they work a lot with wisdom tales. Some of them are very funny, you know. You have the Mullah Nasruddin. You have these. You have in the teachings of the Oriental teachings, you have the use of tales that are mystical tales that are extremely highly respected and used by the spiritual teachers all the time. And those are actually, you know, but you think of the Christian traditions, you know, that Jesus spoke quite a bit in parables. And in parables, of course, there's something going on. He's not talking really about a shepherd and sheep. You know, there is, what is he really, so to speak? And there's another French philosopher that actually wrote a book, Did the Greeks really believe in their myth? Well, of course they did, and of course they didn't. They did not think that if you climb up Mount Olympus and then you shake hands with Zeus, you know, Aphrodite jumped out of the waters in Cyprus of a particular cave. Well, that cave exists, but everybody who goes there and thought, where is she? You know, this is that the Western mind in the last 300 years got totally lost in this literalism. So what that French philosopher, I think it's Paul Virilio, what it basically says, you know, the problem is not that these folk tales and myths and fairy tales are inferior form of transmitting knowledge, is we have become incapable of directly perceiving symbols, symbolic values. And the word symbol itself, symbalein in Greek. So in symphony, so you have actually forces, they come together, but that actually means there are two dimensions that are converging in a holistic way. In other words, they become one, and they're not in opposites anymore. It's not either or. Is it literal or is it fake? So now we have all these things with the fake news. Then it comes the fact check. We need a symbolic check. That means does what is being said have some symbolic value,
Yeah.
does combine different dimensions of the human experience, of which the factual one is one of them.
Thank you,
Anyway.
Ludwig. The other thing that you mentioned is so many things. My next comment and question is related to voice. You were
Yeah.
talking about storyteller's voice. So how did you find Hesse's voice when you were translating his poems, his poetry?
Well, his voice, actually, if I take it from a literal point of view, I have a recording in German where Hesse speaks on a CD of in the evening going out into the garden as it gets dark, where he lived in Montagnola. He overlooks the lake. And he speaks about for 20 minutes of simply what he sees as he goes out and goes back in. And then you see in a way, the precision, but also the transcending quality of precision, because all of what he sees is not just something that is identified with the eye, but it is also, it is allowed to retain its own life. So he gives back in a way to nature. So his voice is not a commanding voice. And the nature of his physical voice has a certain very slow and deep resonance. And I would say there's a quality of the mature, somewhat lonely and slightly melancholic, sad feel to it. But at same times, it doesn't feel weak. It is that kind of speaking that of a person where the voice is not trying to impress anymore. It's not trying to persuade anymore. It's not the ego voice anymore. It's really the soul voice and the spirit voice that draws the words from their deep roots in the earth and from the deep anchors in the cosmos, in the sky. And from a literary point of view, I would say it is a romantic voice. It is a voice which insists on the value and actually the priority of the inner connection to the divine, which needs to be cultivated beyond ritual and dogma. You know, because that's what he says. An individual, in a way, is an individualist, but not somebody that would be then drawn to hedonism and narcissism, but somebody then who would actually speak from a voice that is characterized by generous compassion that comes out of a mature spirit and a heart that has gone through many pains and aches and I mean his personal life was very, very difficult.
But if I remember correctly, he was very much in good friendship with Carl Gustav Jung, right?
Say it again.
So he was in friendship with Jung, with Carl Gustav Jung. Is that correct?
Yes. That's true. There is this. Actually, he did meet Jung. He did meet Carl Jung, and at one point he was for a while in therapy with this Jungian therapist by the name of Lang. And some people say, particularly in Steppenwolf, we have that reflected in this novel. At one point, he rejected it because what he saw, even though Jungian therapy is very much, I would say, respectful and working with myth and folk tales and fairy tales, in fact, the value of myth plays a huge role in that kind of thinking. But again, he was concerned about this therapy eliminating a part of his inner life, his soul life, and would, through technique, violate the natural formation and going into the world as a whole person. Because there is this illusion, or you could say maybe ideal, in all of the different psychotherapies, and there is such a thing as poetry therapy and bibliotherapy. I did study that actually for a few years. And fairy tales are very powerful, but you somehow operate something away from that which the assumption is that this hindrance or these personal inhibitions or psychological problems are there without a reason, for no reason. And the elimination will bring that person a certain freedom. But I think for Hesse, this is an ego freedom, where actually his own suffering, that he, through his different crises, deep crises of particular of depression, that he had several times in his life, he at one point actually, I feel, understood they had a purpose. It's kind of when the soul goes deep in order to reach for minerals that means sources of nourishment, of growth in a person's development, that are not available by gliding through the happiness of that happens on the surface. He has a wonderful poem actually called Happiness, and where he says, as long as you search happiness, you're not ready to be happy.
Yeah.
So there's this attempt of the ego to lift above and then look down. I think literary criticism is one of those things. It puts you in an authority above and beyond the story.
Yeah.
But Hesse, I think, says, no, go down and deep. Robert Bly was talking about a lot about that. Is you have to go into the grief. You have to go into the pain, not running away from it. Because in and of itself is, and you have to look, particularly in the fairy tale, when we talk about the dwarf next time, because it's usually the dwarf that has the power. The one that is most humiliated, the one that is most considered as being irrelevant. So that is, so that means as you move into the fairy tale, you will be drawn by connecting deep to the content of the story into your own dwarf.
Yeah, actually, that's the just connecting.
And you won't like it. You won't like it.
I know the story already many times.
That's what the Jungians call the shadow.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what you were saying before, that these are my words, that the stories, they suck you in, and clearly, and then there is this relatedness to each of the characters, or maybe just one of those, but clearly the writer, the author, writes himself or herself into the story. So there must be reasons why Hesse was writing these different fairy tales. So was it in a sense of
Yes.
kind of like healing approach for him, or just kind of like conveying some symbolism that was really important to him? What's your take on this?
Yeah. So Volker Michels is the person, he is a scholar of German literature who spent literally over 50 years in cultivating, promoting, editing the work of Hermann Hesse. That is his life work. You will not get around dealing with Hermann Hesse without sooner or later run into Volker Michels. And I just have an article that I looked at this morning, and it says Hesse's fairy tales, they are healing formulas with which present a magic potion. So yes, of course, he was working out his own issues and his own rejection sometimes. You know, there was a a group of people in around 1900 in the south of Switzerland, actually, where Hesse then also lived later, called Monte Verita, the Monte Verita. And that was people who wanted to live a natural life again. And in one of the stories in our book, he deals with this, his own urge to live a natural life. And that meant at that time really free love. And, you know, Rudolf von Laban was there, who brought energy again into dance. It was an exciting group of revolutionaries and intellectuals. And Hesse was there too. And he didn't become vegan and vegetarian, but for a while. But there are pictures of him climbing up a mountain naked, and so living the original. I think I might even have it here and show you. So there was somebody by the name of Arnold Ehret there. I have a picture here. Arnold Ehret was the fasting apostle. And they were, and then there's a picture of Hesse, you know, where he is living back to nature, basically. You have that again, a movement, part of the 60s, you know, where Hesse is so attractive because Hesse is sort of the guru of the 1960s and plays then a big role. He deals as a form of self-therapy, certainly. And then there also was a time when Hesse was an alcoholic, and there may have been some he just wanted to really go to these extremes of getting the ultimate experience of the divine through artificial means, you know, what then later on becomes the whole movement with LSD and so on, with psychedelic drugs. And there are a lot of people that, you know, they went on some psychedelic trips reading Steppenwolf because that was supposed to be the appropriate accompanying literature. But Hesse then rejects them in the story that we will actually read. It's called, I think it's called Dr. Knöpf's End, and says that's another form of trying to reach paradise and origin. And so he was very much guarded against sentimental idealism of an original living in harmony with nature before all of that civilized nonsense denatured us. On the one hand, as something that will not really serve the development of the person, and on the other hand, for some naive utopianism, you know, and then he plays it out, you know, in the glass speed game for that novel for which he got the Nobel Prize, and then he goes in Narcissus and Goldman, he goes back into medieval times, but these are just extended frames of reference that for him bring in a literary, in a narrative way, dimensions to a contemporary reader of what are potentials and possibilities, but also where the potentials and possibilities that she showed and what has been discovered and emphasized at one point and is seen as the way to the future is brought together actually again into what is the task of the immediate time. You know, he was a pacifist and he was accused, you know, this is just, you're dreaming of a peaceful world. And he said, yes, yes, I'm a dreamer, but I am somebody who is also active. It's not like I don't have any social consciousness. And being in Switzerland, he helped many, many people with money, with shelter, with already in World War I, he started actually an organization to send good literature to prisoners of war. So he was very active in World War I and during World War II with people that needed to escape from the horrors that were all around Switzerland. So that wasn't an either or, even though he was accused quite a bit of being, you know, you lead us into away from, well, from factual realism. And
Thank you,
there's not enough soul, there's not enough heart, there's not enough spirit in your gigantic data collections and the way you think you can manipulate and control the word, the language, because you are missing out on the magic, on the mystic that has its own right and purpose, and that dimension that generates meaning in language.
Beautiful. Beautifully said.
It's not in the vocabulary. You need something else that puts a fire into that wood.
Thank you, Ludwig. Well, you know, I'm happy to talk to you. But you know, whenever I was actually waiting from our audience, any questions, any comments, we still have a bit of a time. So if you wish, you can either put your words in the chat section or the question answer, or we can just see each other in December as you wish. But so it is not just about me conversing with Ludwig, which I enjoy so much, as always. You can raise your hand as
somebody said to me that they're gonna be. It was amazing, they said, and then they see me in September, and yeah, well, actually, if someone does want to contact me, you know, my email is lmfischer38@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer.
Would you actually mind, Ludwig, to put your email in the chat box and send it to our audience? That would be the best, if you don't mind. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
So I push the button, everyone, and it should show up.
I can't see it.
If you want, if you don't mind, I can share your email here in the chat only of these attendees.
All
Yes,
right, sure.
yeah, that would be wonderful. And then I can see Jonathan. Thank you for the mention of Donovan. He was a staple of my youth. Yeah.
Oh, he's wonderful, and he's still. You can look him up. You really can listen 2 hours and 50 minutes, all of these fairy tales, and read by him with great passion. And you know, he's a modern romantic, I would say. And he wrote some wonderful songs. There is this lyrical element within that hard rock communities of the 60s, and he represents that very well. So yeah, I recommend them. It's you can purchase it. Anybody can purchase it right now online. Just click, and Donovan, Hermann Hesse fairy tales, read by, and you can even order it. And I think you can listen to part of it for free.
Excellent.
Online.
Great
Donovan, read it.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Georg, for putting Ludwig's email in the chat box. So anybody would like to reach out to him, please feel to do so. Next month, 10th of December, your host will be Jim Garrison, who is not available today. And December, I won't be available because I'm teaching a course. But I can actually see that there is a comment here, which I'm going to read out. Amazing presentation. We, husband and I, are sitting here with much pleasure listening to this discussion. We are both retired now, but have advanced degrees, and we both met and married after receiving undergrad degrees as well in German language and literature at UW in Seattle. This brings us back the touch we all both loved and still do about Hermann Hesse, a touchstone from our past. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. How amazing.
Next time, we will focus very specifically, going from the general to the specific, on the two tales, the dwarf and Iris. So whoever wants to be well prepared, please read those, particularly these two tales. And I'm looking forward to December the 10th. And thank you, Georgie, for being the gracious hostess of this meeting. And until next time, all the best.
All the best. Take good care. Thank you, Georg. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ludwig. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.